everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 33. This week we'll be talking about goals and loops, or just loops in general. It's a really interesting concept that's getting a lot of buzz for most loops. Also, Amazon just announced they're pouring $1 billion into a new division called FDE, Forward Deployed Engineering. Not a new thing, but new for them. Also, companies are not sure how to govern AI usage. Interesting conversation. With me, as usual, I have my friend. So yeah, before we get into the tool of the week, um, so Amazon is basically taking a page from a bunch of the AI companies. I mean, I know you've mentioned it before. AWS is really not doing very much. I mean, they've integrated like AI into Amazon.com. They host models on AWS. I'm sure they have a lot of tools, but they're not in the model game. They're not a model provider. They might have like a foundational model. I'm not sure about that. They might have one that they're working on internally. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But they're certainly not like they're not like an OpenAI or Google or a SpaceX. But earlier this year, OpenAI and Anthropic announced their own FDE teams, like similar to SRE, FDE, Forward Deploy Engineer. And obviously Palantir's been doing this for, a long time. And so yeah, I mean, I think the general premise is like they know that people are even the model providers know that this stuff is really new. People are not sure how to integrate it. And there's a lot of value in it's a utility. It's like, you're teaching somebody how to use electricity for the first time. You need to teach people like, oh, you can build lamps and you can build, you know, dishwashers and washing machines or microwaves. And these things will consume the electricity and then we'll make money that way. So forward deployed engineering's premise is like, you really need to like kind of like uh, usher people into an era or usher people into its usage and integrate them into it. And then sort of like, you're kind of, I mean, it's a little bit like dealing drugs, I guess you could say. You're getting them on the hook, you're getting them hooked into your product with the end goal of you're making money on the pro serves, but you're also making money on, token consumption, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts about the Amazons and the Metas and the Googles and categories I feel like they're falling into. But as far as forward deployed engineers go, um, I think some of it is like getting people, kind of like your analogy, it's getting them enticed and getting them sort of hooked on it. But I think another aspect of it is that you have to go through like a education loop because everything's moving so quickly that like you don't have time to like educate the market over time with like a marketing strategy, um, and to go through like the normal cycle of like trying to um, introduce a new technology and get people comfortable around it. Like you have to move at a breakneck speed. So I think the forward deployed engineers is kind of like, okay, I get there's an Overton window. I get there's, maybe no one internal in your organization who's ready for this stuff yet. But we can put people on the ground and then you can learn through watching those people. You can have things rub off on your team. And I think that's probably like, if I were to think about it from a perspective of like me purchasing that, that would be my thought process as a leader. Like if I were a CTO, I'd be less interested in the idea of like, oh, wow, there's a team that's going to implement it for me. It saves me some engineering cycles. Or, I wouldn't think of it as a traditional contracting arrangement where I'm getting some extra heads. I would think of it as like a way of injecting knowledge about how to operate in these areas to my organization where it doesn't exist. It's like getting teachers, it's almost like like agile coaching. You're getting those folks to come in and kind of inject a new culture. And that kind of leads into what I was thinking before about the two categories of companies. Like, I think, you can see Google starting to fall behind. Meta, of course, has had a sort of struggle with it. Um, Amazon seems like they fell behind. I mean, obviously they have a cloud computing angle and everything like that, but what do all these companies have in common versus the companies that are forging ahead at breakneck speeds is whether the company was started in the AI era or before. And I think what that means is that you can't just throw money at this problem. Like, you have to turn all your thousands of employees into this like completely new paradigm shift. And the reality is some of those employees are going to be resistant and not come along. And then, even if they ultimately would come along, like, these big organizations act as like, if they don't have a strong leader really pushing everyone, like someone who's going to kick down the door and say, no, 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 we're doing this, then like the organization is really slow to move because there's like layers and layers and layers of meetings and people doing, fear, uncertainty, and doubt by asking questions. And what about this? And what about this edge case or this client? How are we going to support this? And what about this legacy system? And you get like mired in like, leadership, if they're not completely on board and have the confidence to know where they're going, they're going to be mired by all those questions and it's going to slow you down. So I think a lot of these organizations, like Google is a good example. It's almost like every step forward they take in the AI direction comes at the expense of like existing business. And, I imagine at the very least, their existing business is a distraction. Where these other companies who have started in the AI era, they built their whole org chart from the beginning with the idea that we don't know where we're going. We're going to evolve. We're going to quickly iterate. And they don't have the legacy business as a distraction. They can keep laser focused on the problem at hand. And I think that's why Meta and Google, you'd think Google would be, if you were on like a betting market, you would have put all your money on Google because they've been working on this for over a generation. So, but the reality is that the company it takes to be able to operate in this new world is like a complete table. You have to wipe the table almost. And it's difficult to do that.
Let's talk about well, I'm curious, the market signal around these models are amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. I mean, businesses aside, they're amazing, right? By the way, Amazon has Nova. It's their own they have their own model.
Mm-hmm.
You never heard of it probably until now. Uh, but
When I was in school, Nova was like when you needed extra help, and they put you in the Nova classes. When I
it
was a
was
kid
like
in high school,
it was like a TV show on PBS.
oh really?
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Nova. Anyway, but just the idea that you need engineers like out in front, like kind of slinging this, like kind of like crack. It's in a way you're like out on the street trying to sell your product, like for Amazon, like, or any company. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you're making money on both sides. You're making money on pro serves. You're making money on consumption, because you're going to be getting people to use your infrastructure, whether it's tokens or whatever servers, um, and you're paying for the pro serve. So it's almost like a glorified sales engineer, in a new sense, but like a
Mm-hmm.
forward deployed engineer seems like the new sales engineer. I'm not only going to, and maybe sales engineer is not the right word. Maybe it's not an apples to apples, but yeah, I'm just, it's an
Well, you make a
interesting.
good point. Is
Mhm.
one of the things that I've seen startups do very effectively, and they have to do it by necessity because they don't have the headcount, is that you know, in a traditional startup, like you'd have to have someone who's customer facing, and then typically you'd have engineers back, like hopefully heads down, working on things 24 hours a day, and they don't have enough time to come up for air or go talk to clients, etc. But in this new world, an engineer can move a mountain, and then they're often, especially in a startup, there's a lot of synergies that come with the engineer actually being the person who talks to the customer, understands the pain, and then can not have to go through a translation layer. You know, people forget that humans are actually horrible at communicating with each other. So like
Yeah.
anytime you have something complex and you have to communicate it to somebody else, like nobody's a perfect communicator to begin with, but then, you know, you have to truncate like gigs of data in your mind into like kilobytes per second, you
It's
know, or
like
bytes per second
It's like Tom Smikowski from
coming out of your
Office
mouth.
Space. I talk to the engineers. I'm good with
So
people.
so every one of those layers you have to go through, you're going to have, it's loss. There's loss in that layer, and that loss comes at the expense of like aligning the application you're building with the intent behind it that the customer has, and you know, the gap between them being satisfied or not. So a forward deployed engineer is of great value because you are removing translation layers between, you know, all the product folks and the non-technical folks trying to explain in non-technical language to an engineer what the customer wants. um, so I think there's a lot of benefit to that as well. Like, get your smartest engineers into the field, and they can still beat the productivity they had when they were doing coding 100% of the time by hand, you know. So
I
maybe
think,
instead of a 20x engineer, they're a 10x engineer, but that alignment is of great benefit, you know.
well, I think the difference is that if you're like an AWS or you're an Anthropic or OpenAI, there is no product like other than the API, right? Or the models themselves. Like to me, like if you want to dumb down AI, it's another API, right? It's a long polling API. There's tools you wrap around it, a harness, an agent, whatever you want to call it. They're selling API usage. So to me, the forward deployed engineer's job is to get into an organization and figure out how AI could better improve the business process, right? Whether it be automating things or, helping to do semi-automated processes, um, essentially augmenting your business to automate things further, right? So I think it's slightly different than traditional professional services where you do have a product and the sales engineer is trying to wrap the product around their use case. Or, as you said, like trying to translate requirements back to the product team to get it onto the roadmap, to like get engineers to like pay attention to it, to somehow translate the initial request from the product person. It was probably a much simple way to do it, but then the sales engineer interpreted it a certain way, and through I don't know if you remember playing the telephone game, right?
Yeah.
Essentially that's what it is. So yeah, it's slightly different because they're really just selling usage and then taking the usage and building some kind of automation or applications that help solve your business use cases.
Yeah. I might be minimizing ProServe a little bit, you know, professional services, but
Mm-hmm.
um, at least in my experience, when I worked in businesses that had professional services that they would sell, I kind of, nowadays, I always think back of it as kind of like you're you're selling shortcuts past your design debt, right? Like you wish your product could do that automatically for them, but it can't. So you fill the gap by putting heads there and charging for a
Right.
service for them to
Right.
generate this report or do something like that. So
Right.
like in this new world, like is there really design debt anymore? It's harder to set up a professional services team than it is to just build that into your product at this point. So it's like I wonder if ProServe is really a thing anymore, but I'm probably missing some sort of like really good example
Well,
of a
I
professional services that doesn't fall into that category.
I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
Hmm.
I'm starting to think and feel that everything is ProServe because
Mm.
buying a platform is mostly not needed. Like, what are the things you actually buy are utilities? Like, you buy AI consumption or you buy a database. Like, you're not going to write a database. Like, or you buy, like, you know, SSO integration or credit card processing. And you stitch all of these utilities together to solve a unique use case for you. So to me, if the model providers are assembling all of these like teams, they have all they could build any SaaS system they want. Why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Because they can go and build something custom for somebody and embed them deeper. So to me, I think everything is I think the way the new generation of SaaS or whatever it is, utility, like if you're building a utility, like if you're building a database company, like you want to get people to integrate into your utility so that they're embedded in it. It's harder for them to eject out of it. That's to me really where the value is utilities, not SaaS, not wrapping your use case around a customer's, like that. If you start trying to charge people for pro serves around your SaaS use case, it
Hmm.
becomes desirable to just build your own thing, right? Like build your own CRM, build your own chat platform, whatever it might be.
Yeah. I go back and forth. I mean, on the
Yeah.
one hand, I understand what you're saying about utilities, but I also think that like the critical mass for what you can sell is a lot larger now, a lot higher rung on the ladder. The first rung is a lot higher. Like it's harder to sell, a small utility nowadays because people can just generate it in a few seconds. Um, so it's almost like I try to figure out like where is the stopping ground in sophistication before you've hit the critical mass of what someone will pay for in this new world. Um,
Like, are you going to write Postgres?
I mean, well, a good example is you said you wouldn't write your own database, but I almost feel like we have written our own database to
No,
some
no, no.
extent.
I mean, like,
Hmm.
yeah, sure. Yeah. Like, I mean more of like at a primitive level, like where it becomes, yeah, I think there's like a chart of complexity,
Hmm.
like building Postgres or building Redis is probably not worth it, right? Or building a message queue, like
Well, I think that
like
it's like
an
typically
enterprise
the
level. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I think
Yeah.
typically like I mean, I think it maybe is just a re-articulation of what we already said that the build versus buy has changed, but it leaks down into utilities too. Um, like it may be absolutely bonkers for you to make your own Postgres if you're like selling sneakers and building e-commerce websites. Um, but like I think that there's probably startups out there that before AI would never try to build their own database. They'd be on like a buy search or looking through open source projects for finding somebody who did an academic project of some database that fits their need that they have that other databases don't. But
Hmm.
nowadays they might just make it themselves. A good example is like you might be doing some sort of financial company and there's no database that handles your particular use case at the performance that you need. It's a contrived example from the past of a company I work for. FactSet Research Systems had developed their own database for precisely that reason. Um, so I think what I'm saying is the bar to do that has become a lot easier, right? Um, so I think people will do it. So I think that you're right. There are utilities that people will buy, and I think there's still a market for that. But I think there's also like going to be far more utilities, and you're going to have to be much more niche. Like it's going to be it's not going to be like, oh, we're going to use Postgres. There's going to be like thousands of different examples of databases in the future because
Hmm.
had some sort of reason to do it, and then they open sourced it or they put it out there as a product to try to
Yeah,
sell their pieces,
sure.
who knows?
Yeah, and on the flip side, I think more people are into writing software than ever before. So the marketplace, you could argue, is larger than it was for these
Oh yeah.
utilities. So, but yeah, I mean,
What?
I think there is some kind of there's some kind of formula that every person goes through to decide whether or not it's worth building or buying, and it depends. It really does. It's not. I would just say that I think that the idea of the behemoth SaaS company that you're wrapping professional services around and trying to pigeonhole the marketplace for those types of things doesn't have the type of moat it used to you because many companies or organizations can choose to do it and build their own um, at a much smaller price point, and not be bound to, like, whatever hourly or fixed rate pricing a professional services team might, which is never going to fully solve your problem, is it wasn't designed for you. It's still going to be a hack. Like, you're basically hiring people to hack their own solution, as you said.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if sometimes I think though, I wonder if like the idea that SaaS is done is not specific enough. Like I don't think it's
Yeah,
all of SaaS that's done. There's like
yeah,
a subset of SaaS that's done that I don't think has quite been identified yet. Um, and I,
yeah,
for me, it feels like if you had an app that tries to be everything for everyone, you're gonna have a lot of trouble because that means that your users are probably using a small subset of your features and the moat isn't as big as what you thought. Whereas if you're a very niche software that's like got incredible market fit with a specific niche, I think it's probably harder to displace you because how much pain are you causing if your application's working great? And, at a root level, people don't want to reinvent the wheel if it's working great. They want to have that responsibility taken off of their shoulders and say, hey, it works, right?
yeah,
Um, so I think if your application like threads the needle very well for a niche or a very well trodden workflow, um, and it and people have come to rely on it, I think it's probably, unless your pricing was completely out of whack and you were milking people, you might want to lower your pricing.
yeah.
Um,
Like, there's definitely economies of scale here. You can't
yeah.
just charge people I think of like this law application called Clio that a lot of attorneys use, and it helps with doing a lot of the back and forth of gathering evidence and whatever have you, communication.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a very large law firm, like, and you're paying a premium, I'm not saying that, I'm not picking on that company, but you might at some point decide, hey, like, might as well build our own thing. There's features missing. It'll be less expensive. It's worth for us to go and build our own thing and deal with the pain of a migration versus like continuing to pay a third party to get something that we're not happy. I think one thing for certain is that there is an impact on the marketplace for SaaS companies. And what I thought of is, like, platforms are more valuable and probably have much more of a foothold. Platforms that are not designed necessarily for a specific use case,
Mm-hmm.
but are more like utilities, are less impacted because, like, for example, like a Stripe, right? It's an
Mm-hmm.
API, it's not really a SaaS company, it's more of a platform company. And it's much more difficult to go and get accredited. Now that could change, getting PCI DSS and, the infrastructure and the security associated with housing the data and the credit card numbers. Most people don't want to have to deal with that, right? They don't want to have to deal with Most companies don't want to have to deal with that. So, things like that, I think, have a much greater chance of surviving in the near term versus companies that are pigeonholed for a very specific use case.
I think You make some good points, but do they have staying power forever because it's just complicated and people don't want to do it, or is the tail just longer for them because eventually, like, their complicated thing will be boiled down to modules where other people will do those modules, and
Yeah,
eventually someone will just trivially put them together. So it's like, I think their tail is longer, but they eventually succumb to the same thing. I think the staying
possibly.
power is like proprietary data. Like, if you have data that nobody else has, then there's no way for anyone else to set up shop. And then I think the other staying power is what I would call agentic SaaS, right? Deterministic SaaS, like the idea that like your SaaS critical mass is that you went through all the trouble to integrate all these vendors, and you have like an integration page that's 9 yards long, and like, who else is going to integrate with all those APIs? They don't have enough time to do it, so they're just going to buy what we have. Is gone, because now you
Mhm.
can integrate with all the writing deterministic code is just the simplest thing ever. So you can just generate that stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what is a moat is agentic SaaS, where your SaaS product is now delivering something amazing. And the only way for it to possibly deliver it is it's going through agentic workflows with tool calling and React loops and prompts and everything like that. Because the long tail to that is that the fine tuning of the prompts and the dialing in of all the long tail of the meta of an agentic application, dialing in the prompts, choosing the correct models, the failover of different models, um, the self-improving loops, everything that comes to bear when you're fine tuning an application that's relying on LLMs to make decisions. um, that becomes a moat, because people can't just generate that overnight, because there's learning baked into the configuration of it, the data of it itself.
Yeah.
You can't just say one shot Claude code and you're going to have all your prompts dialed in properly to do the tool calls. Your first version of it is going to have a lot of tool call failures, just like Claude code did. Um, and so you're going to have to go through that learning experience and that sort of iterative approach. So like, the faster you get on that self improving flywheel iteration in a SaaS, an agentic SaaS product, the further you gain in a moat. But outside of that, like, if your SaaS product is just deterministic code that aggregates a whole bunch of things and builds a workflow, it's basically CRUD on a database with some great business logic. Like, you're you don't have a great moat anymore, unless
Yeah,
you got
I, I
data.
am I am I'm hesitant to project further out than 6 months, because if I told you like a year and a half ago that you would not be writing any more code, you probably wouldn't believe me, or maybe you would, I don't know. But anyway, that's a good transition into the tool of the week. You started talking about agentic loops. I've been seeing a lot of there's, I think it started with like the slash loop command, and certainly Ralph Wiggum loops we've talked about back, who knows, 20 or so episodes ago.
Mm-hmm.
Which is now just like a first class citizen essentially of most of the agentic harnesses, or the coding harnesses rather. But there's a lot of hype around loops. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of things like Andre Karpathy, and who's the guy that writes OpenClaw, that works for OpenAI. Basically, like
Right.
yeah, their whole thing is like, they you don't want to sit there uh in front of a terminal and be prompting your agents all day. So that's where loops come into play. So yeah, curious to hear what you've found. I know that we use loops every day, and it's just not in the way that maybe most people think of them. It's more of a concept than a command. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, I think the topic is much more interesting conceptually than it is specific about the feature of Claude Code, because, like I said, Codex and others have these features. Um, we're even probably a little bit late to the feature. It's been out for a while.
Cursor has
Um,
it, you
yeah,
know.
but the concept itself is really fascinating, and really kind of the meta behind it is pretty awesome. But just for to get everyone up to speed, the slash loop command in Claude essentially allows you to take your session and set like an interval, a cron job, kind of concept to it, where you can say run this prompt every 15 minutes or something like that. And you know, it seems kind of basic, but it has a lot of power. You can use it for things like for like QA checks, and like a good example is a loop I would use. And we built our own looping system so that it can run out of band of a session in Claude Code, because our sessions are really short lived. We have work trees that are constantly being created and deleted as they finish tickets. So you need like kind of a session that is long lived. But regardless, you can use it for doing things like maintenance work, like things that you would do on a reoccurring basis or you would hope to do. You know, it can eliminate alert fatigue. You know, there's so many things that you have to look at on a reoccurring basis to go see if there's, you know, errors in the logs, or you know, any sort of weird patterns in your traffic, or CPU usage or memory, etc. Um, Sometimes you're correlating issues together and looking at multiple sources to try to see what might cause this, or what might have happened during that period of time. You're, you know, you'd love to go look through the docs every day and see where your docs are old, but you maybe only do it once a month. There's a whole bunch of reoccurring
I
tasks.
feel like loops is like the bad. It's like not a great word.
Yeah, it's, I kind of think of it as like, because it's not like a loop in the sense that it's a for loop where it's going through something very deterministic. It's like you're asking something which could be very sophisticated. Your ask, it could be a whole bunch of steps, it could have branching, it could be a whole DAG of things you're asking for, because the agent's going to go and work on it. So essentially it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like delegating something to an agent to go do on a reoccurring basis. And that thing could be pretty sophisticated. It could be like, go look through all the tickets and find things that are unblocked by other tickets, and change their statuses. Or it could be as sophisticated as go through the logs and find errors, and then look in our ticket history and see if, you know, we filed a bug for that already. You know, it could, there's an unlimited amount of tasks you can think of that you would love to do, and maybe you do occasionally, but you would, you know, there's always a lag of when the last time you did it. So it brings all those things into sync, and they can be done on a more reoccurring basis. So it's actually super powerful, because, you know, once you get your AI development to a level of 4 or 5 in terms of sophistication and maturity, you're not even looking at code anymore. Things are going into production, or, you know, they're going into, you know, at least dev and staging very swiftly without many humans looking at it, if any at all. And having that loop of maintenance and monitoring and all kinds of things happening maybe to the right of the development process, looking at dev servers and things like that, helps you find the gaps in what has come out of your factory,
Mm-hmm.
um, that wasn't perhaps complete, or, you know, less likely complete nowadays, but more likely it has some sort of edge case or some sort of bug or some sort of thing that it couldn't have figured out in dev, but now that it's deployed, it can figure it out. So it helps clean up all those things for you. And once you have a mechanism that takes an issue and drives it to PR and to merge, you know, automatically via, you know, an agentic pipeline, then you use loops to kind of feed new tickets into that machine, and it becomes like a self improving loop where, um, you know, you're sort of feeding off of the output of your code and the output of your code running in servers,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're feeding it back in ingested in new tickets that then improve those things. So once you have something like that operating, you find yourself in a position where you're finding out that something you delivered had a bug when you're reading about it being fixed,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, it was delivered a couple of hours ago. So these loops are pretty cool and they're pretty tight. um, and then even loops around like smoke testing and integration testing, like, it's surprisingly powerful to have like a Playwright CLI or some sort of headless browser uh, capability running in Claude Code or running in Codex on a reoccurring basis, maybe every, 3 times a day or maybe once a day. And it goes through your app and then goes through like a whole bunch of natural language things like I'm a user, I'm going to go do this. And it really, you know, it runs and you forget about it until 1 week, you delivered something major and now a whole bunch of tickets come in from like things that you wouldn't have caught unless you opened up the app and went through some tortured use case or some sort of side page that you never go to and you never, add this or add that like a user would do. So you discover a lot of things that way. And then once again, you feed all those things back into the machine and the machine pumps out fixes and pumps out new patches and new updates. So it's a lot of people are caught up on this sort of waterfall approach that they think if they just get their initial prompts better and their tickets better, that the coding piece will never make a mistake. It'll come out pristine. It'll be like God blessed it. But that's not the reality. The whole thing is probabilistic. So you want to have like iterative loops. It's almost like you're putting the AI through its own agile approach, and you have to build these I was going to try to combine agile and agentic into an agile agentic loop. I wish there was a more, I could have just made a catchphrase there, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
you're building a process as opposed to just like a means to an end.
Well, it's just like humans. Like you'd have human beings that were writing code, and then, you have your static code analysis. The coding agents are not good at necessarily projecting what will happen when the code runs in production, when it's actually using production databases. You could certainly build digital twins and things of that nature, but you would have human beings looking at alerts, looking at logs. It's an eventual consistency. So doing everything in a Claude Code prompt or Codex prompt is not going to see those things. You could certainly sleep and do those things, but the point is that like you want to be able to give it the same abilities that a human being would have to go and investigate these things, and like you said, open tickets for them and fix them.
Yeah. I mean, the best thing about loops is they can go do tedious work on a reoccurring basis for you, right? Like, we all know that it can go do tedious work on a ticket. Like, you have a ticket, finishes the ticket for you. Great, it did all the tedious work. But like, there's a lot of tedious work that you do on a reoccurring basis, and you should automate those too with loops.
Yep.
And then you can run them more often than you would.
Hmm.
Imagine documentation that was guaranteed to be up to date every day. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Or
that's possible
self-improving
with loops.
prompts.
Yeah, there's even more advanced things like you're saying, like self-improving prompts and things like that.
Right. So what about goals?
So goals are, you know, it could have just been a parameter on the loop, honestly, because it's really no different than a loop, other than the fact that a loop is in Claude Code, a loop is interval based, like every 15 minutes run this or once a day run this. Whereas a goal is like a verifiable end state. So that it's like you give it some sort of way that it can verify that it's done. So it has to have some sort of like goal to achieve that it's able to verify. So you could say, um, like work on this until all the unit tests are finished, or write unit tests until you have a certain percentage of coverage. I don't know if I'd recommend that, but uh, it's when you have some sort of way that the agent can look at on each loop and say, am I done yet? So it could be you have a list of things you want it to do and you say, keep on working on it until it's done. you know uh, a common use case for it, which is a little bit dated because I don't actually do things this way anymore, but you used to generate plans and markdown files, and it would give you like phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four. And then you would be like, okay, let's build the plan. And it would be like, okay, I'm done. I did the first two phases. And you'd be like, there's 5 phases, do the next three. So a goal could immediately give you a way of solving that by saying make sure complete all of the phases. So now it has a a goal in mind, and it will continue working all throughout the night And I think you can put guardrails on it where like don't do more than like 20 turns or something like that. But overall, it'll continue working until it hits one of your criteria for completion.
I mean, is it even necessary? Doesn't it just do that by default? Like it sounds like a Ralph Wiggum loop almost. Like keep
It is
going
exactly
until.
a route. It's basically Anthropic's Ralph Wiggum loop. Um,
I
you know,
mean,
it's
I very rarely need to tell like something to complete. I mean, I would argue that like you could make a ticket too large and you should probably decompose it.
yeah.
And that's probably a like a smell, if you will. Like an anti pattern is like you need to use goal.
You know, the place where I could see goal being useful is
Penetration testing. Do not
bullish.
stop until you until you get
Do
till you
not
get in.
stop until our adversary has been defeated.
Yes.
um, yeah, other than the fact that
You reach
Anthropic will
100% of your
hopefully shut you
token.
down before you hack the
You
planet.
or you reach
Um,
100% of your token limit in
yeah.
that.
Don't stop until we've compromised 100% of the computers on the internet.
Yeah. Use all my
um,
tokens.
yeah. Um, but I think it's probably useful for, I could see myself using it for greenfield projects where you're at like you're at like empty repo and you're in the idea of like I want to lay out the MVP and it gives you like the 5 phases, but you can't parallelize them. You can't have them run in parallel yet because your project's so new. So everything builds upon the last
Right.
one because you're setting
Right.
it. So then a goal is awesome because otherwise Claude will be like, I finished a third of it. Do you want me to continue? It's like, duh. So I could see it being useful there. But I can't, I honestly, and it's, hopefully people out there can probably point out some things I'm missing, but I don't see myself using goals outside of that thing. Like once you're running at full speed with a project that people are using, um, there's very few like waterfall type things that you run into where you have some sort of elaborate plan that's going to take a long time. A lot of what you're doing is like incremental things or maybe a major refactor, but it's not like you know it's not something that happens often. I would say that I would reach out for the goal and say, let's do it.
My favorite one is when it says this is going to take 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. You never ask for the estimate. Like someone in Anthropic was just like, we got to put an estimate in there, even when people don't want it. And then it has to be estimated as if a squirrel was doing it. Cause it's always like, it plans out my ticket. It's like I broke it down into 3 phases. It'll take 2 weeks for this phase, 3 weeks for that phase, and then I'll be like, let's do it all in one PR. And then like 30 minutes later, it's like done. So it's not good at
Yeah.
estimates.
So yeah, speaking of token usage, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal today about how companies are using this same sort of FinOps approach that they had with cloud to manage the usage of AI spend, if you will. And yeah, people are not. I think people are surprised how much it's costing because it's not the same as. Um, I mean, maybe it is the same, but um, it's not just humans prompting; it's also agents prompting and more sophisticated models. Costs are continuing to grow exponentially. Um, yes, they
Well, that's why I
estimate.
tell people don't be in a rush to get on the enterprise pricing if you can stay at some of the lower tiers, because this early on, and this is the tough spot for a lot of larger companies, is there not only is it harder inherently for a larger company to go through this transition, which I alluded to earlier with like Google and all them, they're even having trouble and they're practically invented it.
Mhm.
Um, but then the pricing also hamstrings you, because like if you have more than 150 people, so you're outside of like a Claude Teams account, and maybe you have some particular like ITAR, you don't want your traffic going out of the US or something like that, you end up getting caught in the enterprise pricing, which puts you at per token pricing. And
Yeah.
then compound that with the fact that your organization is so large and money is not unlimited, you end up in this posture and this culture where instead of like a startup where people have unlimited tokens and they're running and they're experimenting and they're going down pathways that make no sense, but they can, figure it out and pivot and try this and try that. And let's figure out if we just automated all this and built up a factory and blah, 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 blah. The larger companies are going in, like dipping their toes in the water, like trying to figure out how to minimize their costs. And I think that what's going to happen in the long run is there's going to be an effect of like they're not going to be going along on the journey as fast as the startups are, and the startups are going to have an advantage of knowing what's coming next, which they always do, but to some
Yeah.
extent just be based on the numbers, but it's going to be even more pronounced.
So
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So Goldman Sachs research shows that currently non-agent workloads, so what you're talking about, subscription-based models, are on the number of 5.6 quadrillion tokens. But next year, they're projecting that enterprise and consumer agent token usage will meet or exceed non-agent based workloads. So when you're talking about always on autonomous agents that are doing work, um, that usage is not eligible currently for subscription based workloads. Not that I'm aware of. It's all API usage.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's really what the article is saying, is that as more companies shift to always on usage versus human prompting sort of behavior, like, because that's where most of the subscription model goes to. It's not fully automated. It's, you got to sit there and talk to it. um, so yeah, some companies are looking into putting optimization practices in place. um, Principal, the insurance company, is doing what's, right sizing, which is what people were doing 10, 15 years ago with AWS, is that you automatically select the right model for the job, so you're not, using like Fable 5 for like, write me a limerick or a haiku for like an actual haiku, a
Mm-hmm.
poem, or generating images. um so yeah. um
Well, I think the org chart changes. um like I think that like I think that some of this right sizes itself because you can do more with less. And I don't necessarily mean that like every company is going to downsize, but I think they're going to take on more things they can do. So yes, the spend will be high, but they'll be doing a proportionally larger amount of value, and therefore if they're monetizing that value properly, it'll just be a further scale of some amount of margin that they're comfortable with, and the whole business will have grown by that amount. um, but I think that like there could I think there could be right sizing though, because I think that like the org chart doesn't make any sense, right? Like you used to have like, you
yeah,
know
sure.
I think engineers used to be like, you had there were like replicas. You had n engineers, right? But I think that's
Hmm.
less important nowadays. And now you have engineers that are around functions, like somebody who's, like the person that's performing some sort of function on the factory itself, as opposed to like I'm just n engineers to bite down the backlog. Because I think more and more engineers aren't going to be biting down the backlog at all. They're going to be making sure that the whole factory is operating as efficiently as possible.
Hmm.
And their backlogs are going to be more about augmenting the factory to be more efficient or to perform additional tasks or at a higher quality, as opposed to like being n
Yeah.
member of an engineering team to bite down the backlog faster and have bigger velocity.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. Like the org charts are definitely blown up, but you are in this in between area where people are playing around with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody, I think what this article is centered around is that people are using AI and building agents and coding with it, and finance or FinOps is just catching up and being like, "Oh crap, like this shit is expensive,"
Yeah.
and not sure what to do. At the same time, a chatbot versus an agent are way two different things. Um,
Yeah.
and while AI agents, I guess we're like in the beginning of the agentic era. Like it's still really new. Like loops are like a good example of like people wrapping their heads around an agentic era. But
Mm-hmm.
like if you can imagine that you have agents doing all kinds of things, not just coding, but you know, cleaning up your CRM and transcribing, taking actions on your meeting notes and um whatever have you. I mean, there's a million things that AI could do just beyond taking over your engineering department and building your not everyone's building software is I guess what I'm saying. um there's a time period where you know companies are needing to figure out how to keep their costs down, and forget about context windows being massive and not being optimized. I think there's a really big opportunity. And like, are model providers incentivized to lower costs? It's a little bit of an oligopoly.
I mean, I think they're incentivized to lower costs um, based on competition. But I think that what's happened is that some of the pressure from competition has gone away because the field is kind of dwindled, not in terms of companies going out of business, but in terms of like them falling out of the top tier. Like I don't think Google is top tier anymore.
I think
Um,
competition is like, to me, competition is like, are gas stations in competition with each other? Are like, is your internet provider in competition with each other? Is like your power company? And there's certainly disruptive markets like
well,
your own
I think
solar.
yeah, they are.
Yeah, but not
Um,
really. They're semi, like they're all
well,
kind
you live
of
in Jersey, I live in Texas. I got like a choice of 100 different power companies, so they
sure,
are.
sure, sure.
And
Uh,
I can call up a power company and be like, "You're fired," and get one immediately.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. So yeah, that's. I think the premise is what I'm saying
in a
is
perfect
like,
world, yeah, they would be.
yeah, there's four companies that kind of control everything,
Hmm.
like as far as prices go, and they
Yeah,
all kind of charge the same thing.
yeah, but I think also there's pressure from open source models that are biting at their heels. You know, like it's hard to tell. Like, are they being very greedy or are they? Because you remember, it's it's not. They have to also make sure that they have enough money coming in for what's coming down the pipe. They might need
Hmm.
more. So I don't think they're being unfair in their pricing, right? Like
Hmm.
what they're delivering is something that's simply amazing. It's hard to put a price tag on it. People are paying for it. So, what other way do you establish a fair price than people are paying for it, right?
Hmm.
Now, are they able to sustain that pricing at that level? Is a question that I think everyone has. Um, is the pricing going to go down over time that has traditionally happened with tech? or
Yeah.
is it going to go up in time because it doesn't track tech? Maybe it tracks something else like a regulated utility,
Yeah.
where it just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to model it from that perspective, but I half expect that in 5 years, we're all just running these things locally on our laptops. Like if you were to extrapolate to like cell phones, like when I was working on mobile software back in the day, in like, when I was still going through college, working nights or working days and going to college at night, um, we were like optimizing the code because you only had a certain amount of memory or a certain
Right.
amount of CPU on this Palm Pilot or on this Pocket PC. And then, oh, if it ran out of batteries, the whole application uninstalled because you had flash drives. And, it was like, but nowadays, like the, the cell phone I have in my pocket is far more powerful than the laptop I was building the software for back then. So it's like, uh,
So are you
I think
saying
that
that
AI will
are
go
you
through the same thing.
are you saying that model providers are like mainframes that like
I think that
they're
model
real?
providers are like electricity companies at some point in the future. Which, by the way, blows my mind because if you think of who captured the majority of the market growth from electricity, it wasn't the electricity companies; it was everyone that built something on top of the electricity companies. So if that plays out with AI, then the market for like things built on top of these AI providers is going to be absolutely massive.
What
Like,
do you mean by that? Who
well,
like you mean consumption wise?
yeah, like who made more money? Microsoft building the OS, or all the aggregate of every company who ever built something on top of the OS?
Yeah.
Microsoft has only made a very small percentage of the value that their OS has created. Whereas the vast majority of the money made off of Microsoft OS is from people that don't even work for Microsoft. They started their own company building some software. Um, so I think that like the people building the applications on top of the AI will capture the vast majority of the value.
I was going
Uh,
I was going in a different direction with it. I thought that okay, maybe some companies need really high powered models, but as the cost of as chips become more powerful and we figure out ways to run them using less electricity, and you can find more optimal ways to load models locally, then most people don't actually need to ever talk to a model outside of their own system. They can actually, like, it becomes like you buy the latest MacBook and you have, say, 2 years from now you can have an equivalent model running as like Opus, which is good enough to do most things. Like, maybe a few generations now, like, do you really need a model that's that powerful to run on your local system? It's good enough, right? You can code with it. You can,
I don't know. It's impossible to predict, right?
yeah.
Um,
I'm just
you
saying,
know,
like, I went in the opposite direction of
mhm.
like maybe the whole marketplace for really powerful models just falls through, like, because some evolution of like this stuff is evolving so fast. Like the hardware's getting better. There might be more efficient ways to run it. Like some break a few breakthroughs away from, like you said, like, I mean, I can run some local models on my cell phone that are pretty damn good, like that are completely offline. I mean, obviously, I can't search the web with them, and I can't do tool calling with them, but I can be in an airplane in airplane mode, and I can ask questions to it and get rapid responses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the provider models, assuming they keep enough ahead of the open source models, I think they'll have a market for people that are willing to pay a premium to be better. You
Hmm.
know, it's like if you went to the store and can replace your brain, are you going to buy the smartest brain or are you going to go budget?
Yeah. Well, here to go back to this, Qualcomm um, basically has their own hardware.
Mhm.
They're putting caps on how many tokens certain teams can use. Some teams need more tokens. They also instituted a show back, meaning they basically show them dollars tied to tokens so that people understand what their spend does. And basically, what they're doing is that Qualcomm is running some older models, like the latest models. You don't always need them. Like you could run probably Opus 4.6 or 4.7 or using like something, another model, but they're actually using some open source model running on their own hardware. So
Hmm.
they actually have their own server farm. Um, so basically, like they're using a combination of approaches in order to reduce their spend, kind of a hybrid approach.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how those efforts play out because the holy grail is how do you save tokens without making your agent any dumber, you know? And then the second piece to that that complicates is just how smart does your agent need to be in order to accomplish the task at a quality that's important, you know?
It's almost like you need something ahead of the prompt to determine which is the best agent for the best model for the job, and then dynamically decide, based off of, before you go and start doing stuff, you almost have like an interceptor that um, makes a business use case as to what kind of capital to spend.
If you're going down the road of trying to optimize for less token usage, then if you're eyeballing it and saying this feels right or this feels right, like you're going to end up potentially in a bad place.
Hmm.
Um, in order to do that type of work of dialing in the right models and the right, if you're going to make changes to how it works to try to limit tokens and things like that, you really need some great, sort of benchmarking and testing around that stuff to really be able to understand how much quality am I giving up by saving this amount of dollars. And I hear a lot of people talking about this framework or that framework, limits tokens, but no one talks about like, well, how much dumber is it making the model? You know,
Mm,
they'll have a whole bunch of numbers about how much tokens it saved you, but they don't say, well, I've run it through all these benchmarks and it maintains all the benchmarks. Um,
yeah.
so, I advise a lot of caution when optimizing tokens because it's a lot more complicated than what you might expect. Every token that you deprive of the agent, or every token that you limit the agent in terms of what it can say back to you, is loss. Just like in a conversation, if I said, okay, you got to tell me what you said, but it's got to be 3 sentences, there's certain things that you're going to want to say that you can't say. And if I say, okay, I'm going to ask you a question and you can only answer me yes or no, everyone knows how that goes. You're gonna be like, it's not a yes or no answer. I want to put nuance in it, So,
Yeah.
uh, same thing with agents.
Speaking of quality, Ford hired back a bunch of their human engineers. They had installed a bunch of AI cameras and tools to do quality checks on
Mm.
vehicles, and it turned out that they weren't getting good quality. They hired back approximately 300 quality inspectors, um, a bunch of pitfalls, basically saying that the AI is good, but wasn't didn't have enough information, wasn't trained enough, and yeah, kind of an example of going too far too fast before actually uh, understanding what would happen as a result of laying off people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about it honestly. I also wouldn't put it past Ford to just make some mistakes. Like it's a new world for them. Um,
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Well, no, they're
necessarily
they're calling
consider.
out. They called out that they made mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if I were looking for advice on how to do AI, I don't know if Ford would be in my short list.
Mistakenly,
Um,
we thought that just by just introducing artificial intelligence and ingesting the design requirements we had, we would produce a high quality product.
what was that? Just by doing what?
Just by giving it the design requirements and giving it to AI, that it would produce a high quality product. Yeah, we recognize that for us to enhance some of our automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence, we need to ensure that they were trained by the most experienced individuals. So they just gave it the specs. Yeah.
I have,
Oh,
I know there's in context learning, but like I have a gripe that when someone's talking about inference on a LLM and then they use the word train, right? Like,
yeah, sure, of
you know what I
course.
mean? Like, are you really training the AI forward? I don't think you're training.
It's overloaded. It's overloaded. Train
Yeah.
could be like we prompted it like one time and we said remember this, and that's training, or some form of RAG, which is
Yeah. We
like
put
not
it in the
training.
markdown file I had available to it, like a Claude MD.
Yeah,
Sure, that's like in context learning, but I wouldn't use the word train for that. Like when you use train, you're
yeah.
starting to like, to me, confuse people into thinking that you're making models, which
I think
maybe I'm
people
wrong. Maybe
want to
they are
do
making
that.
models.
I think people think it's impressive to say train. Like they use that term to wow people and don't actually
Hmm.
understand what it means. And or they say it and they don't understand the nuance. So it's just ignorance.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that a lot in government work too. People would talk about how do we train models? How do we train models? I'm like, why don't you guys start with the inference side of things? There's so many things you could do with the inference side. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have any expertise in the data science necessary in order to do training. And maybe you could accomplish like some RL training around the edges, but like even that I think is like you'd have to have some specific use case for why that's necessary.
Yeah. We should probably talk about that at some point. Like what it means to train versus well, this has been great. Next week is episode 34. We'll have a special guest, Andy Code. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all. Take care, everybody.